Hello and welcome to Canavan TV. My name is Connor MacLeod, and in this interview I speak to the spokesperson for the Legalise Cannabis Campaign Scotland, Linda Hendry. Linda is a veteran cannabis activist who has tirelessly campaigned against cannabis prohibition since 1979. In this interview we discuss the roots of the Legalise Cannabis Campaign Scotland, Linda's articles submitted to the international cannabis community, medicinal and recreational cannabis in the UK, cannabis in Scotland, creating an online 420 cannabis protest, and where cannabis stands in 2021. Make sure and like and subscribe and turn on notifications, and if you'd like to support the channel, you can join me on Patreon, where you can help build a stronger cannabis media platform. Now then, let's talk cannabis. How you doing?
Fine, but it's not very light outside. I was hoping it'd be a nice sunny day because the lights in here are, those low energy ones.
Yeah, no, it looks okay.
Does it? You're looking far brighter.
I am. I say that because I've actually invested in this light last week, and every other preceding interview that I've done, it's been in the dark, so people have just heard these words come from this shadow figure. So I had to.
Oh well, that's all right.
Thanks for coming on the channel, and I really appreciate this.
Well,
So the first thing I would just get cracking with, could you just give a background on, at the risk of sounding like I'm asking a self-evident question, what the Legalise Cannabis Campaign Scotland is?
Well, we were set up in 1979 as part of a United Kingdom campaign that later it was trading while insolvent, so it had to close down. But the Scottish members, especially under Graham Steele at that point, David Steele's son, were adamant that we would carry on, and we did. And now I'm the spokesperson. First we were campaigning for medical use, which allegedly the UK now has, and you can have if you've got enough money and the right problems. Yeah. So we could sort of tick that one as done. We thought that the medical use would be by tincture, which was the traditional use, and you would be able to get it in your chemist's or your health food shop, but we haven't managed to achieve that yet. And then our other biggie is that adults should be allowed to grow a few plants of their own at home. And then we'd also like to see cannabis social clubs, which at the moment we're calling safe consumption spaces, to try and tie in with the Peter Crykant thing to have safe consumption spaces for heroin users. It could be all under the one law if they wanted to change the law. And then we'd like hemp growing to be made a lot easier, because over the years since we started, it's been shown how good hemp is for the environment and how it would combat climate change. And at the moment, Scottish farmers have to go through a complete palaver of licensing. So either the Scottish government could give them a one-off grant to get through that palaver, or most of the palaver should just be removed. It's stuff like not being allowed to grow it in sight of a main road and things like that. Yeah. And then we'd also like to see the THC level in hemp rise a bit, because a problem farmers have in very sunny years is that their hemp can grow too much THC, and all over the place farmers lose their crops because of exceeding the THC level in 5 sample plants that are tested.
Yeah, that's one of the issues that was actually brought up with the interview I did the other day with Kyle Esplin, the chairman of the Scottish Hemp Association. He said the exact same thing, that the scenario with THC is ambiguous at best and ignorant at worst, really, because there shouldn't be a situation where you prohibit the ability for a natural plant to grow naturally, and it's actually a detriment to the end product if you're forcing it to behave in an uncharacteristic way.
Yes, but when you see all the stuff they do to plants, I mean, not just hemp plants, all over the world, things change to have less flavor or more color or whatever.
You touched on the medical side there. One of the things, actually, doing some research for the interview, I came across a few articles that you've written a few years ago. I hope you're okay, mate. I mean, they're all extremely pertinent to the situation and insightful as well. So anybody that's watching this, I'll put the links up in the description as well, so you can have a look. But there's 3 articles in particular. There was one of them that you were challenged at a climate change convention. There was also a please don't make me a medical user, and a stigma question. Would you mind if we went over these? Is that okay?
Well, I'll start with the stigma first. I mean, in 1970, I became an unmarried mum.
Right.
And I had far more stigma from that than I've ever had from cannabis.
Right.
I mean, the unmarried mum stigma, nowadays people don't notice because I'm an unmarried gran. And the other thing is, it may not look like it at the moment with it being winter, but in the summer I take a good tan, and I'm frequently, not so much now, but in the 90s, I was told to F off back to India or called an effing Paki. And the most recent one, I was putting my rubbish out and somebody told me to go back to Romania and stop using the street bins.
Right.
So I've had more stigma from being assumed to be of a different race, not Scottish, than I've had for cannabis. I mean, I worked in schools and I think there were a few posh lassies and maybe 2 teachers who looked down on me for wanting to legalise cannabis. But while I was working in schools, I stood for the Legalise Cannabis Alliance, and I was given time off by the council, paid time off, to stand for Parliament. So I don't think there's a stigma. Well, there's not a stigma for me. But I mean, I can understand for some people who look very different, you know, maybe if they've got facial tattoos, and particularly people who smell very strongly of weed, I suppose that could be part of a stigma that they experience. But is it any worse than the stigma that a trans person or a gay person or a differently raced person gets? So I don't think we should dwell on the stigma, and I'd rather people never spoke about it, because I think talking about it increases it. You know, people think, oh, did the man at the bus stop look at me because he thinks I'm a cannabis user? There's no point. You have to try and rise above it if you think it's happening to you.
Mentioning the stigma topic actually is like the only stigma potentially could now be within the seemingly polarized position of recreational and medicinal, and it seems to be that that's now there's like almost like not an in-house battle, but there's certainly a dichotomy of conversation when it comes to cannabis. You're either recreational or medicinal, and a lot of the time, what you write quite well in this article here, that often recreational users will proclaim to be medicinal just so they don't feel some relative element that they're using it in an irresponsible manner, because it seems to be sometimes recreational consumption is not frowned upon, but certainly not respected in any way, shape or form. Whereas drinking alcohol at night and just a nice sophisticated glass of wine every evening seems to be respected. I mean, do you have any opinion on that?
Well, one of the best evenings of my life was in San Francisco, where it was legal to smoke a joint, and my host gave me a joint to smoke in the bath and a glass of sparkling rosé, and that was absolutely lovely. You know, it was very, very nice to have a bath with a glass of sparkling wine and a San Franciscan legal joint. It was a real high point.
Exactly, and that's what.
So, I mean, I think alcohol in moderation. Tobacco is even useful for killing greenfly. So I mean, it's actually illegal to use it as a pesticide, but if you've got a cigarette end and greenfly, you might as well mix up a spray and kill your greenfly with it. Maybe that's the most illegal thing I'm advocating in this country.
Potentially so. But it's quite good, because you did mention, if I was to just quote you from the article as well, you went with people insisting, because I think the article also included that you were part of a convention or a meeting, that the meeting had proceeded with everybody claiming, okay, we're all medical users here, and you had proclaimed, well, actually I'm a recreational user, and you were relatively silenced. You were, it was like, no, we're all medical users here. So then this led to this quote here, and you went, sorry, well, I'm not a medical user yet. I don't eat chocolate or drink tea or alcohol for medical reasons, though all have shown medicinal properties. I take them because I like them. Same with cannabis. I like the effects. And that's really well said, Linda, because often people do.
Well, I mean, now you can get cannabis medicinally if you have enough money, and I possibly have enough money, but I don't have a disease that would qualify, because you have to have something that the NHS medicine has not worked for, and then you can apply. I think it may even be that 3 NHS medicines have not worked for, and then you can apply. And none of the things that I've had over the years the NHS medicine has not worked, or the side effects have been worse than the disease.
Yeah.
Or if they were, I stopped using the NHS medicine. So I still don't have much chance of getting medical cannabis. So I have to be a recreational user.
It's frustrating that though, because I think the NICE guidelines in particular, which direct our regulations when it comes to cannabis, are outdated, ignorant, and archaic. But I think that if they were even just, I think one of the things in it is that cannabis doesn't even apply to people that use it for chronic pain. And that's ridiculous, because even in the pharmacopoeia, I think from the beginning of the 20th century, it mentioned that cannabis was extremely effective for dealing with chronic pain. So I think once they maybe tighten the regulations, it might open the door slightly.
I think if we could persuade the Scottish government to let GPs prescribe cannabis, there would be a huge uptake and increase in the amount of people that could get prescribed it.
Yeah.
And we have to work on Jean Freeman and the new drugs minister, Angela Constance, to see if they can come up with something between the two of them that will help GPs to prescribe. Because at the moment, the specialists are just hacked off with all these people asking for cannabis for things that it might not be useful for, or you may have pain and never have seen a specialist, you know.
Yeah.
It's a great big bottleneck at the specialist area.
I actually seen that Angela Constance, the article that when she had mentioned that she says she won't close the door on bold action. She referred it to bold action. Almost a sigh when I read that, because it's not bold action; it's responsible, effective, logical moves. You know, that's what it seems like to be, to just open the door.
Well, I think when she says bold action, she means she might allow some drug consumption rooms for heroin users to keep them out of back alleyways.
Yeah.
But we can certainly use it and say, you know, the more people who can email her, is your bold action going to be letting me grow 3 plants? Or is your bold action going to be letting me start up a cannabis social club?
Yeah.
You know, I think today's task for anybody is to contact Angela Constance, and it will go on until May. You contact her at the Scottish Minister's email address, putting her name in the title line.
I'll be certainly doing that after this interview, and I say anybody that's listening, I recommend you do the exact same thing. That's a great suggestion. You mentioned with the Jersey GPs yesterday, an email when they said that the Jersey GPs are kind of leading the way. Where is it you're finding that information? Because I was actually going to look on that recently.
Well, I was in a Zoom sort of conference call, and there was a chap from Jersey in it. It was a European cannabis network, the Volt Fast one.
Right.
And the guy from Jersey mentioned that the big change had come when the GPs were allowed to prescribe, because they're not really under our law, but they legalized medical cannabis at the same time as us.
Right.
So there must be some connection that means that they do stuff when Westminster does it, but then they have their own government, so they can make up their own laws under that or on top of that. And they're growing a lot of CBD, and they're going to have their first THC factory. I mean, not factory, grow quite soon.
Yeah.
They think that it'll take over from Jersey cows and Jersey potatoes, or fill in the gaps between them for some farmers that either want to give up cows or potatoes.
Yeah, it's a great exchange.
And there's a chance that the Isle of Man could do the same thing. I mean, Professor Nutt went and visited them and spoke to them about it. But what I've heard is that the doctors group on the Isle of Man were against it. So somebody in the Isle of Man would need to work on the doctors there.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to understand the reasoning why they were against it.
Well, probably all this psychosis business and all that, and it's not a scientific medicine that's been tested double blind in this country, because the nice problem is that they won't accept stuff in other languages from other countries. They won't translate research or follow it. It has to be British research.
Yeah, I heard that
in English by a reputable organisation. So I would think that the Isle of Man doctors probably learn in the same universities that our doctors learn.
Yeah.
But obviously somebody in Jersey is a brighter spark than the rest of them.
It certainly appears so. Frustratingly, I came across that when I was interviewing Hannah Deacon, and she was referring to the same thing when she was over in Holland, and then she brought back information and gave it to British officials, British medical practitioners, and they just refused it. They were just, I'm not acknowledging that, and just kind of threw it to the side. I don't know what to make of that, really. It just seems like the height of arrogance.
Well, I mean, we know that when doctors come from abroad, they have to sit a test here. And there are still some who manage to get through it and then practice badly, because every so often there's some wee scandal in the papers, isn't there?
Yeah.
So I think doctors have to be cautious. But their other problem is insurance.
Yeah.
I mean, care homes are finding that at the moment with COVID. And doctors equally have expensive insurance all the time, and it doesn't include prescribing cannabis medicine. So they've, in some ways, got a right to be cautious. And they never did a module when they were training, because some doctors trained 30 years ago, maybe. So the only experience they had of cannabis was if they maybe smoked it while at university or had friends that did. Yeah. And then being a doctor, you probably get some people who come in and claim that cannabis is the cause of all their problems, because it can be an excuse. I mean, it's, you know, sometimes it gets you off on some types of court cases. Yeah. My drug use is the problem. So they see the bad side of it, not the good side of it. Partly because patients won't tell them about their cannabis use. I mean, every patient should actually tell their doctor about their cannabis use, but how many do?
Yeah, that's actually a great point. I'm kind of guilty of that myself.
Have you told your doctor?
Yeah.
I mean, you can start by saying you've used it in Amsterdam and it helped or something like that. You know, you don't need to say, I used it last Tuesday down the school playground or whatever.
Yeah, it's like I used it on the morning in this morning. On the journey in here, I had a joint. Yeah, I probably shouldn't say that.
But I have met people whose doctors said, why have you stopped taking your epilepsy medicine? I noticed in your notes you haven't had a prescription for it for 2 years. And the person said, well, I've been using cannabis instead and I don't need my epilepsy medicine. That was somebody I spoke to at a demo in Glasgow.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, how important do you think that is? I mean, we've got the Medical Cannabis Clinician Society, which is essentially, it was before COVID, doing like an educational basis for educating GPs. How important is it to kind of amp up that incentive and just kind of steamroll ahead with educating people that are going through their degree now?
Well, that's why we post the details of these doctors' seminars and groups on our Facebook and Twitter in the hope that people can pass them on to their doctor, because rather than bringing some info that's from Spain or from America, the stuff your doctor needs is something British, and these doctors' groups are the place that he'll find it. Yeah. You know, even if it is, because although medicine is so tied up with scientific research, it also has anecdotal things that they will use. And medicines can also be used for things that aren't what they're prescribed for. So doctors do have some leeway, but they don't have much incentive to use it.
Yeah. What do you see this coming year then? Obviously with COVID in place, there's been 3 or 4 different articles that have arrived in the past 2 weeks that have said that the UK should steamroll ahead with cannabis saving the economy. I mean, do you think that's a possibility this year?
Well, you never know. Rishi Sunak is going to have a budget. He's got a problem because everybody wants him to keep the lift on universal credit, which universal credit was always too low. Yeah. So he could have a brainstorm, because when medical cannabis was legalized, we didn't have any warning. It was just the Home Secretary before the one we've got now suddenly said, I mean, if you look at it, you can see there were wee suggestions that people had been talking to him, but it just sort of came out of the blue. Yeah. Medical cannabis will be legalized by a certain date. And at that point, he did say that GPs were going to be allowed to prescribe it in 2 years. But then he was replaced by Priti Patel. And I don't see her having had much cannabis experience.
No.
Whereas I think Rishi Sunak, working in the hospitality trade, probably encountered it more than Priti Patel would.
Yeah.
I mean, she just seems so uptight, whereas he is a bit more laid back.
Yeah, I would agree.
So I think we'll have to wait for another Home Secretary before we get much from there, unless it comes on the tax side.
Yeah.
But most countries that have implemented the taxation system, it takes 2 to 4 years to get it sorted out, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because they have to put it to various bodies and it has to be gone over and civil servants have to look at it. And I mean, the simplest way would just to say it should have the same VAT as alcohol and tobacco. But I think what is maybe more hopeful is if they decriminalize it a bit more to allow people to grow in their own homes and to allow cannabis social clubs.
Yeah.
But that still doesn't get labeling on the packet, which is what I'd like to see, something that says so much, the THC to CBD ratio, so that people don't accidentally get too stoned, because some people find it very distressing when they take too much THC. Yeah.
And one of the things I find quite interesting is that how exactly it would be, because when I read these things and they say that, cannabis would help the economy, boost it through, we don't really have a legitimate structure in place. Canada, when they had said that they were going to pass it through, I think they gave themselves about 18 months, but after saying we're going to
that's
legal.
Yeah, that's why I say 2 years.
Yeah.
I think some of the United States did it a wee bit faster, but they already had a medical system with dispensaries. The thing we've got at the moment in Scotland is we've got a Scottish Parliament election coming up in May, and it will probably be by mostly postal voting, I would think, due to the COVID situation. So it's really up to everybody who's interested in the issue to write to all the candidates, to email all the candidates. And there are sites that you can do that very easily. You just put in your postcode and it tells you who all your candidates are. So it's not a difficult job to ask the local candidates what their position is and what they're going to do first, and to suggest that they should allow GPs to prescribe and that people should be allowed to grow a few plants in their own home. Even 2 plants would be better than none, wouldn't it?
Yeah, without a doubt.
I mean, I know other people say they would need 5 or 6 or whatever, but if you start with 2, you could maybe get it bumped up from there. And also, if it's 2 per adult, that would be 4 per house if you've got 2 adults.
The thing is, do you know one of the things I wonder about that when they say 2 plants? Is the way I see it is like they should have it more accurate. There should be 2 plants in flower, because then that still allows you a rotational thing. To say 2 plants kind of removes the element of having a circular process, because then you can only have 2. So if you've got 2 in flower and then you have 2 in just say vegetation, that is an illegal process then.
Well, I think you'd have to have 1 in flower and 1 in vegetation, wouldn't you?
Yeah, exactly.
But also, it depends how big your cannabis plant is. I mean, what is the space you're growing it in? If you've got one of those lovely staircases with a big window at the top, you can probably grow it in natural light and it can be 8 foot tall.
Yeah.
I
had an image of it kind of winding up the staircase there.
Yeah. Have you seen pictures of the bonsai ones? Because they wind all over the place.
No, I think the best pictures I've seen is there's been a couple of guys standing, and they're standing like next to a cannabis plant that's almost the size of a house. It's ridiculous. It's like a small shed or just a huge bush. Yeah. It just look brilliant.
There's a good one that's grown out of somebody's greenhouse and it's come out, all the vents.
Yeah. Maybe they should have topped that earlier on.
And Lenny Henry's got a great story about when he visited his relatives in the West Indies, that the plants were so big that airplanes were getting stuck in them. Some of the plants in places like the West Indies and Southern Africa, they grow them for more than 1 year.
Really?
So they can be huge. I mean, we have this strange obsession with harvesting them, which requires killing them.
Yeah.
But if you're harvesting your apples, you don't saw down the tree, do you?
No, that's right.
So there is a case, I think, for keeping a plant all year if you can manage to. Though some people say it loses its potency. I don't know.
Yeah, it's certainly worth a try.
well, you mustn't do it in this country because it's still illegal. But in the Netherlands, they have all these mother plants that they get the clones from. And I think some of the mother plants are 20 years old.
Yeah, that's right.
So
Yeah.
you don't have to chop your plant down at the roots unless your house is going to get too cold, or wherever you're growing it is going to get too cold for it to survive.
You know, I wonder if any of the viewers watching this right this moment are sitting there and they're looking over at the corner at a 10-year-old mother they've got in the corner like, I love you, it's brilliant.
Well, either that or they've just burst into tears because they chopped down their plant in October or whenever.
Yeah.
But I mean, the other reason people cut them down is to get rid of the evidence. I mean, I've known of a lot of people who were growing even a cannabis plant, and they came home one day and opened the front door and the smell hit them and they thought, no, it's got to go.
Yeah, I've been there.
Because the postman would be able to smell it, wouldn't he?
Yeah, I think that's where appropriate growing equipment comes in. And then I think that's one of the things I'd mentioned actually in an interview I did a while ago, maybe last year, where it'd be brilliant to have almost like little squads of people that maintained, like we're designed just for, it's like a company based. We help you grow, we help set up your grow, make sure it's stable, almost kind of like, you know, an electrician coming in to check your stuff. It'd be good to have that facility.
Well, we've had that idea, you know, when people say that a few plants, whether it's 5 or however many, wouldn't work for the disabled who can't grow their own. That was when we thought there should be the people who go around and tend your plant for you so that you don't have to do it because you're not capable physically.
Yeah, and you're still able to get homegrown things, plant that you're able to know the quantity of it, that's the stuff that's in it, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and if you want to give it pesticides and artificial fertilizers, you can, and if you want it to be organic, it can be organic.
Yeah, no, I would certainly agree though that 2 plants, I'd say 2 plants in flower would be handy, because I've actually had a friend that he uses only 2 plants and his yield is tremendous. 2 plants is enough, you know. It really is. So hopefully this year we do get a small amount of change. But what's on the cards for the campaign this year? Do you have anything coming up in the near future?
Not anything in the way of demos where people go out on the streets. I mean, over the years, we've demonstrated with almost anything we can tag along with, whether it's, we used to go to the miners' galas, and we actually made money at the miners' galas with a petition and a collecting can.
Yeah.
We go to the 1st of May one, we went on Make Poverty History. We've been on anti-racism ones in Glasgow. We've been on ones for Stop Climate Change. But if demonstrations aren't allowed, we'll not be going on any. Our banner will just be sitting in the cupboard.
I've actually got an idea this year. I was hoping anybody that's got a Cannabis Social Club that's listening, please email me, cannamantv@gmail.com. And my intention is to kind of do a group call, because you can get up to 49 participants on these calls. So I was intending on, hopefully, if we can get all Cannabis Social Clubs in Scotland, or even part in the UK as well, if we can even get them all together and we could just phone up, so we could all have it on a live video of all these people celebrating on 420, you know. So it's a work in progress, but I certainly intend on doing something like that this year.
There's been a bit of stuff on Twitter about, we won't be able to have 420. And we've been replying, well, we can have an internet, you know, a Zoom 420. There was something last year, but it was more just like a wee television program that only lasted for about an hour, if that.
Right.
I think it's still on the internet. And well, I found it was a bit basic and condescending and not very participatory, but it was better than nothing. Yeah. But I don't think we'll be having hemp stock in Glasgow like the dear Glasgow Cannabis Social Club has organised for many years, and it was one of the highlights of my year often.
I've actually never been, and I really hope to go next year. Hopefully it's up and running next year.
Well, it'll be the year after next, I think. Yeah. Well, I go with my stamp and I give people temporary tattoos.
Quality. Yeah, that's brilliant. Well, I sincerely hope that the COVID doesn't hinder too much of any cannabis movement. Hopefully this year it kind of steamrolls ahead.
Anyway, well, thank you for talking to me. Yes.
Thank you very much for your time. I've really enjoyed this.
Well, maybe someday we'll talk to each other again in real life.
Thanks to Linda for giving me her time. And thanks to you for sticking around until the end of the video. I sincerely hope you enjoyed the content. I'll see you next time.